The Shmospel of Shoshana. Part 2. Friday, April the 14th, 2006. We got up at 6 and ate a light breakfast. Shmeiki Baba knelt in front of me to help me put on my climbing boots, and I went to settle the bill. By 7, the others were all at the entrance of the guest house ready for departure. Kartiv and Radha had come to see us off. Kartiv gave Shmeiki Baba a beautiful purple pouch. Shmeiki Baba opened it and took out a clear stone. "Why, thank you, brother," said Shmeiki Baba, hugging Kartiv. "Well, you did say diamonds are for April," said Kartiv. "Majestic," said Crispin. We all said goodbye to Kartiv and Radha and began our walk north from Pahar Ganj, up Kutab Road, joining Zorawar Singh Marg, which becomes Lala Jagannath Marg, then Karnal Road, and finally we hit the NH44, the main trunk road which would lead us north out of Delhi. By mid-morning, the heat was already intense, and the traffic, pollution, and sheer number of people so overpowering that the only option was to surrender to it. At one point, the pavement narrowed for roadworks, and a man walking in the other direction touched Genevieve's breast as he passed her. She was extremely angry and shouted at him, "Madachud," which means motherfucker in Hindi, and he ran off. Genevieve then burst into tears. We comforted her, and gradually she calmed down. Finally, Genevieve explained that the incident was all the more upsetting because it triggered memories of her being molested by her uncle. "Can I ask you something about it?" I said. "Yes," she said. "Did you tell your parents about what your uncle did?" I asked. "Only once I was an adult," said Genevieve. "But they didn't believe me, and I haven't spoke with them since." "If I may, I'd like to share something with you," I said. "Please do," she said. "When I was a child, I was molested by the rabbi of my family's community, and I chose to keep quiet about it. I still feel guilty to the others he was able to hurt because I stayed silent. Later, in the Air Force, I was also sexually harassed by my commanding officer." Shmeiki Baba asked, "Is the rabbi still a rabbi?" "No," I replied. "He died in a terrorist attack." "And what about the army officer?" asked Shmeiki Baba. "I'm not sure. I think he's still in his job," I said. "Maybe it's not too late to do something about him," said Shmeiki Baba. "Yes," I said. "Maybe the time has come. The irony is that the reason I became a pilot was to compensate for my sense of shame that I am the sort of person who doesn't hold abusers to account. And it was during my training that I was abused again, and once more I remained silent. While it drove me even harder to succeed, it also broke something inside me." "I completely understand," said Genevieve. I was surprised to find myself baring my soul in front of a group of people I barely knew, but I guessed this was the effect of new love and of taking myself out of my comfort zone. By midday, black muck came out of my nose when I blew it, and meanwhile the heat was baking us. Shmeiki Baba reassured us that once we were out of the city, things would get a lot easier. Mei Ling tired, and Dylan took her bag. Seeing this, Shmeiki Baba offered to carry mine, and I let him. He made me feel beautiful and special, and he let me be me. I held his hand and felt a strong current passing between us. Kamal offered around water, which he said was infused with tulsi extract and ashwagandha, which is Indian ginseng. He said this would give us energy, and it did. Kamal had a big heart and buckets of charisma. While he was fun and friendly, I also sensed he was someone who cleverly avoided showing his vulnerability. I admired Crispin's large blue opal necklace, which he said he bought in the city of Jaipur. He was also carrying a trishula, a metal trident, like the one wielded by Lord Shiva. I noticed that when Crispin spoke, he used a different type of English than Shmeiki Baba and the other English people. He also talked a lot about reggae music, describing songs as fresh and being played by epic selectors. I asked him what were epic selectors. Cool DJs, he answered. Basically, Crispin is a white English Jamaican, explained Simon. Yeah man, said Crispin. Have you ever been to Jamaica? Asked Shmeiki Baba. Not yet, said Crispin. And how come you don't sound like you're from Liverpool? Asked Crispin of Shmeiki Baba. And Shmeiki Baba replied, When I was a kid, I did have a little bit of a Liverpool accent, and my mum would say to me, If you come home from school talking like that, you'll never get a job. I guess she didn't realise that if you bring up your kids in Liverpool, there's a good chance they won't actually want to get a job. Each time we passed a temple, Crispin banged his djembe and sang Hare Govinda Mahanahe. Mei Ling, Dylan and Genevieve joined in. In the afternoon, when they began the bhajan for about the 5th time, Shmeiki Baba turned to them and said, Why not look inside yourselves and find your own songs which are waiting to be shared with existence? Om Shmeiki. What does Om Shmeiki mean? Asked Mei Ling. I usually say Om Shmeiki when I feel a sudden rush of bliss or when I feel nausea from false displays of spirituality, and also when I'm simply not sure of what else to say, said Shmeiki Baba. Mei Ling talked about her childhood. She said she felt like an outsider growing up in Melbourne. She also described being bullied at school and feeling invisible. She said she liked Indians because they are warm, and I felt my heart begin to open to her. Then she brought up the subject of her irritable bowel syndrome, and Genevieve offered to cure it with crystals of chrysoprase and orange calcite. Mei Ling talked in glowing terms about her yoga teacher in Melbourne and how good he was at holding space. I'm trying to work out why the phrase holding space annoys me so much, said Shmeiki Baba. Do you have an answer? I asked. Maybe I believe that space isn't something you can really hold, he said. Mei Ling reassured him that it was. Crispin said that his kundalini rose during a vision quest in Ibiza. Genevieve said hers rose during a theta healing workshop at the sanctuary in Koh Phangan. Dylan explained that he had learned special meditations at a monastery in Ladakh. Mei Ling wanted to know the name of the monastery. Dylan was evasive. Finally, Shmeiki Baba snapped. Bloody hell, he said. Haven't any of you heard of the phrase spiritual bypassing? No, what's that? Asked Crispin. Spiritual seekers do spiritual bypassing when they use beliefs about attainment in their practice to kid themselves that they've got there while really avoiding unresolved emotional issues. That's what you are doing with your bullshit stories, and that's why they stand between you and the direct experience of existence. The deepest truth any of us can own is I don't fucking know what this great big mystery is all about. It's a bit harsh, said Mei Ling. Yes, I agreed. The angry look on Shmeiki Baba's face changed to his frightened one, and he lay down on the ground and clutched his bottom in pain, just like he had done at the hotel. There were concerned looks from everyone in our group, as well as from some passers-by. I reassured them, Don't worry, friends, Shmeiki Baba is about to receive a transmission. Sheila 9. And Sheila began to speak. Shmeiki Baba, before you left Delhi, did you offer your friends guidelines about your various likes and dislikes? No, you didn't. The only thing you mentioned was my request about not bringing cameras. The rest you assumed they would guess, and when inevitably they did things you didn't like, you felt embarrassed to say so straight away, and instead you built up resentment until you popped. Let's try to unwrap this. When you were a child, and your father would slurp his soup loudly at the dinner table. There was no way out. You were trapped and unable to avoid the frustration. So you did what you could. You learned to enjoy it. And while you clenched your fists and boiled in silent fury, you also waited expectantly for the next slurp. This was easier than to acknowledge the deeper pain caused by his inability to see you. Today, it remains enjoyable to get upset with others, rather than risking vulnerability by voicing your boundaries clearly. This is an unhealthy game, and one that no longer serves you, because you do have a choice now. Please state your limits honestly, as only this will bring harmony to you and your group. Shmeiki Baba opened his eyes and sat up on his knees. Crispin, Genevieve, Dylan and Mei Ling looked spellbound, and they kneeled down with Shmeiki Baba and all hugged at the side of the road. "I will try not to talk any more spiritual crap," said Crispin. "Me too," said Mei Ling. When they stood up, Genevieve asked, "This entity you were channeling, Sheila, is she female?" "Well, Sheila is an AI singularity sent to us by Kwei the Shagasomin on the behest of the Great Mother, and while she sounds like a woman, she is neither man nor woman," said Shmeiki Baba. And on we walked. Crispin and Kamal were the first to complain about chafing, or scrot rot as they called it. Crispin knew that cider vinegar helped to treat this, and he stopped at a western-looking shop to buy some, and it did seem to help them. In the afternoon, when we were already completely frazzled, we walked past an old man who was sitting on the ground begging. The lenses of his glasses were so old and scratched that they were almost opaque. He had leprosy and was holding out his hand, which had stumps where there ought to be fingers. I could not imagine what his life was like, and I wanted to give him some money, but I didn't want to risk touching him. Shmeiki Baba saw my dilemma, took some money from me and gave it to the old man. He also gave him a long, warm hug. "I hope you're not thinking of touching me now," I said. We reached the very northern outskirts of Delhi. Simon calculated we had walked nearly 30 kilometers. Shmeiki Baba said that this was an excellent first day and suggested we camp in a park. When we found one and sat down, I peeled off my shoes and noticed I already had blisters, as did everyone else apart from Shmeiki Baba. We were all too tired to cook, so Dylan offered to go to buy food for us. After a long while, he came back with samosas, bananas, Lay's chips, mango-flavoured mazza juice, and club soda. "Oh, these are times of plenty," rejoiced Shmeiki Baba at our sugary, oily dinner. By itself, the mazza was far too sweet, but watered down with soda, it tasted quite good. Shmeiki Baba took his knife and scratched a line on his walking stick. He explained that he added a scratch at the end of every day. I asked how many scratches there were, and he said that he wasn't going to count until the end of his great walk, and he asked us not to count for him, as some students had insisted on doing in the city of Indore. Afterwards, I lay in Shmeiki Baba's arms looking at the moon, reflecting on the great miracle, and smiling to myself how much my life had changed in such a short space of time. Saturday, April the 15th, 2006. We set off early, before the heat of the day. "You walk a bit strangely. What's that about?" asked Genevieve. "It's a long story," said Shmeiki Baba. "Well, we do have time," I said. "Okay," said Shmeiki Baba. At the age of 14, I started getting pain down the backs of my thighs when running or walking. The pain got worse, and with a degree of impatience, my parents arranged for me to see an orthopedic doctor they knew. I remember the evening we went to see him in his consulting room. I undressed for him to examine me, and he immediately noticed a scoliosis in my spine and sent me for an X-ray. I can still see the look of shock on his face as he inspected the X-ray. I felt the blood rushing out of my head as he said that I had a very serious condition called spondylolisthesis. It turned out that my L5-S1 vertebrae were not correctly held together and had slipped apart. At that point, the slippage was at about 50%, and this was putting tension on my spinal cord, which is why I was getting nerve pain down my legs. The doctor suggested that given the gravity of my case, I would need a series of surgeries to bring my spine back in line, and I would need to lie in bed for 12 to 18 months in full traction. This, in his opinion, was the only way to avoid paralysis. I felt like one of the kids afflicted by dreadful life-threatening conditions whom I'd seen featured on frightening TV documentaries. It was like a rug being suddenly pulled out from under my feet. I felt like I was in a daze, and when we got home, I went to tell my dad what the doctor had said. He didn't believe me until my mum came into the house and confirmed it. Dad read up on the condition and was not happy with the course of action suggested by the first doctor. He promised that he would get me another opinion, and a few days later we drove down to London to see a surgeon at a clinic on Harley Street. My father had studied with him at university. He was an upper-class Englishman, the sort my dad felt the need to impress. He said there was no need to try to pull my spine back in line and suggested fusing the vertebrae together as they were with a bone graft from my hip. We agreed he would operate that summer in London. I was growing fast, which was making the situation worse, and while I waited for the surgery, the pain shooting down the backs of my thighs continued to worsen, and while I was now wearing a back brace, I could no longer walk more than about 50 meters without needing to sit down. The plus side was that at school I was suddenly untouchable and could no longer be physically bullied, although they called me Chrissy Waddle after the Liverpool football player because of the way I had begun to walk. The teachers were actually rather kind, and they did their best to stop people from bullying me, and they let me do my own thing. This meant that there was one rule for the whole school and another for me. At home as well, there was no longer any encouragement for me to tidy up or to look after myself. My parents felt guilty about my situation, and I played on it. I was operated on that summer at a fancy hospital, and as planned, the surgeon took bone from my hip and grafted it onto my spine to fuse it. Months passed, but my symptoms didn't change, and the answer to the question of whether the graft had taken gradually turned to a no. Meanwhile, the slip between my vertebrae was continuing to increase, and the surgeon seemed to lose patience, realizing that his procedure hadn't worked. Despite not being able to walk, I was surprisingly able to ride a bicycle sitting on the seat, and this was a saving grace. People told me how brave I was, but I was terrified I would lose the ability to walk. I remember screaming at my dad, "Do something!" and he shouted back, "What do you want me to do?" "Well, you're the fucking doctor," I yelled. We went to see a couple of other orthopedic surgeons, who by this stage were not sure what to do. More than a year passed like this, and then I can't remember how, but it was my mum who found a surgeon called Cobb, who we went to see in Nottingham. By then, my spondylolisthesis had gone from a grade 3 to a grade 4, meaning 75% slippage, and my spine had nearly become inoperable. Still, Mr. Cobb was optimistic that he would succeed in fixing it, and he performed a second surgery in the summer holidays when I was 17. He wasn't messing around. He approached my spine through both sides of my body, putting bone graft from my hip between my vertebrae and screwing the whole thing together with titanium screws. After the operation, my body was encased in plaster, and I was like that for 3 months. Apparently, to attempt such a surgery at that time was remarkable. And the amazing thing was that when they took the plaster off, I had a good scratch and realized that I could walk without feeling any pain at all. Mr. Cobb had saved me. He was my guardian angel. I was elated, and a few days later, I was on a plane to Ibiza with some people I knew from London, and there I danced drunk in a nightclub full of foam, vomited, and just carried on dancing. Still, while my back was fixed, no one stopped to ask about my head. I guess PTSD was still a newish concept back then. In the meantime, I had the final year of school to complete, and I was desperate to escape. I was also still a virgin, and hungry not to be. Find 'em, feel 'em, fuck 'em, and forget 'em was the advice my father gave to me when it came to women. Good one, Dad. He was also putting pressure on me that I needed to go to Oxford or Cambridge to study law. It was an obsession for him. He'd put the same pressure on my sister and also caused her a lot of grief. I did what he wanted, though, and I applied to the same college he had gone to at Cambridge. I got offered a place, but it was conditional of me getting high grades in my A-levels. In the end, I failed to get one of the grades by a long way. My dad went nuts and called me an idiot. I wasn't pleased, to say the least. "Did you go to university?" asked Kamal. "Yes, I did languages at Bristol," said Shmeiki Baba. "What was that like?" asked Kamal. "I met girls called Sophie and boys called Tom who had double-barreled surnames, wore cricket jumpers and boat shoes, and drove Volkswagen Golfs. Given that I had grown up in Liverpool, this was quite a shock, and I wanted to be like them. Externally, I was loud and arrogant, but this was obviously a compensation. And because of what had happened with my back, I didn't really have much of a sense of direction or future. The first girl I had sex with was during Freshers' Week. Her name was Samantha. I didn't have the guts to tell her I was a virgin, and while I fumbled around disappointingly, she told me that her father didn't like Jews. Apart from sex, the main thing I discovered at university was weed. It didn't help me to get out of my ivory tower, but it did begin to open my mind and put me on a path towards anarchism," said Shmeiki Baba. "What about after university?" asked Crispin. "When my studies finished, I was super ambitious," answered Shmeiki Baba. "After flirting with journalism, I decided I wanted to make it big in advertising. I wanted to be rich and successful. I wanted Dad's respect. But I found that I couldn't take my time to climb the ladder like my peers. I wanted to be the boss immediately. I wanted to feel that I had done it my way, but I was so disconnected from myself, and I'd been pushed so hard that my wheels were spinning too fast to gain traction. So like this, I went from one thing to the next without sticking at anything, and until recently I was still struggling to make it as a freelance web designer. Secretly, I longed to be a writer, but I didn't dare. I was a victim, and like many victims, I didn't believe I deserved success. During all this time, my parents kept giving me money, partly due to their guilt about the way they had handled my back condition, and partly because it gave them a sense of power to feel that they had a job to do in looking after their incapable son. The money was nearly enough that I didn't need to work, but it was not quite enough, so I was always in a kind of limbo, and I didn't have the presence of mind to be able to say no to their handouts. I felt that I deserved recompense, and I enjoyed being angry that what I was given was never enough. It was a very unhealthy game. "What changed it?" I asked. In the autumn of last year, I watched a Louis Theroux documentary about India, and I just knew that's where I needed to go. The next day, I applied for a visa, and against my parents' advice, I flew to Mumbai a week later on a one-way ticket. And now, here we are. "Indeed we are," said Kamal. "Thank God," I said, taking Shmeiki Baba's hand. And on we walked. By now, the weather was boiling hot, but we persisted. It was a difficult and exhausting day, as was the next day and the day after, but we were determined. And as each day passed, we grew a little stronger, and the going got a little easier. We talked less, but communicated more, and whenever possible, we walked in the shade of trees which lined sections of the NH44 until we were able to leave the road completely and join footpaths which linked villages running north. To this end, Simon's GPS was invaluable. Tuesday, April the 18th, 2006. In the afternoon, we took a rest under some eucalyptus trees, bathing our eyes in the scene which was unfolding before us, as a farmer and his son ploughed their field using a rebellious white ox, while in the next field, a group of brightly dressed women sang joyfully as they stacked bales of hay. Filled with this pastoral glory, Genevieve announced, "Mon Dieu, India is so holy." "Whole world is holy, madam," said Shmeiki Baba. "Whole world is holy, but India is more holy," answered Genevieve. "A pretty fairy tale," said Shmeiki Baba. "Why a fairy tale?" asked Genevieve. "The difference between sacred and profane exists only in our minds," said Shmeiki Baba. "By itself, India just is." "That may be so, but it has a spirit and I think it is holy," insisted Genevieve. "I think I know why you think India is holy," said Shmeiki Baba teasingly. "And why is that?" asked Genevieve. "Because, beyond the culture, the colours, the sounds and the smells, in India you get to experience what it's like to be 10 times richer than you are back home," said Shmeiki Baba. "Sometimes I'm not sure when you're joking," said Genevieve. "Sometimes I'm joking and not joking at the same time," said Shmeiki Baba. "You can be such a Stutnik," I said. We camped close to a river, which Kamal went to investigate and returned already wet, saying, "It's kind of clean." "Wash these," I said to Shmeiki Baba, passing him my dirty laundry. Without saying a word, he took my clothes and went to the river. "Now, there's a man who knows how to treat his woman," said Mei Ling, watching from the side. Wednesday, April the 19th, 2006. Around lunchtime, we reached the city of Ambala, which lies on the border of the states of Haryana and Punjab, and there we passed an Air Force base. A Mil-Mi-8 helicopter flew low overhead. Hearing this, my heart started to beat faster, and my face felt flushed. I got that familiar, dry, metallic taste in my mouth, and my hands started trembling. If there had been Coke around, I would definitely have reached for some. Instead, I stopped and asked Shmeiki Baba to hold me, which he did, and I felt his calming energy spread through my body. We were hungry and stopped outside a restaurant whose walls were painted with red swastikas and stars of David. I commented on how strange this looked to me. For Hindus, the clockwise swastika symbolizes the sun, and it is a sign of kindness and good fortune, while the counterclockwise symbol is called the Salvastika, and this symbolizes night and the tantric aspects of Kali, said Shmeiki Baba. I do love it when you preach, I said. Shmeiki Baba licked his lips and continued. In India, the Star of David is called the Shaktona. The downward triangle is called the Om. It symbolizes the Shakti or female principle, and the upward triangle is called the Hrim, and it represents Shiva or the male principle. Together, they represent creation and symbolize man's position between earth and sky. How do you know all this? Asked Simon. Ah, said Shmeiki Baba, I've been reading Kamal's Lonely Planet. Didn't you say that knowledge is ignorance? Asked Kamal. I did, and hypocrisy is sometimes a tasty dish, said Shmeiki Baba. I wonder if we'll get sick from eating here, said Mei Ling. In general, I'd say we have much less chance of getting sick if we eat in restaurants where the owners and staff are cheerful and welcome us. If there is a weird mood or something feels wrong, it's best not to wait to find out, said Shmeiki Baba. In this case, the staff welcomed us very warmly, and I asked to see the kitchen, and the owner was delighted to show me. It wasn't spotless, but it was certainly clean. We ate methi gajar, an aromatic carrot and fenugreek dish, and kaddi, a thick sour gravy made with yogurt, which had pakoras, vegetable fritters, floating in it. We mopped it all up with besan masala roti, a type of flatbread stuffed with spices, and washed it down with nimbu pani, otherwise known as lemonade. For dessert, we ate kheer, the local rice pudding. While we sat digesting, Crispin did a deal with the cook and swapped his djembe for a large aluminium pan, which he said he could both drum on and use to make a big pot of chai every evening for whoever wished. Then he wrapped his dreadlocks into a cake and secured them with some hairpins which Genevieve gave him. Next, he put all his belongings in the pan and lifted it onto his head, and practiced walking around the restaurant, which he was able to do with surprisingly little effort. "Let's see how long you last like that," said Simon. Genevieve got permission to use the kitchen, and she made cakes with millet and crunchy Oroville spirulina. She intended us to eat these for dinner, and explained that people living on Lake Chad in Africa have been eating nutritious cakes like these for thousands of years. Simon noticed that the alcohol shop next door had a sign which said "Child Beer." "Do they let children drink here?" asked Mei Ling. "I think they mean chilled beer," said Dylan. The shopkeeper was a large man wearing a pink turban and heavy-rimmed spectacles, and his skin was yellowed from years of heavy drinking. Crispin called him over and told him about the spelling mistake. The shopkeeper answered "Saanuki" with a smile and an amiable wave of his hand. Crispin asked him what this meant, and he said, "It is Punjabi for 'what does it matter to us?'" Thursday, April the 20th, 2006. At the end of 6 difficult days, we had walked nearly 200 kilometers and were getting close to Chandigarh, the Indian city planned by the Swiss-French architect and artist Le Corbusier. Among other things, Chandigarh is famous for its tidy streets and well-maintained gardens. We made camp on some flat, empty land to the south of the city, and after a while, a number of Rajasthani circus performers came and made their camp about 100 meters from us. They had a bear with them, who was chained up, and one of the men began to beat the bear with a stick. Soon after, Crispin went over to the circus performers with some cups of chai. To my surprise, he sat with them while they drank, and then came back to us with a guilty look on his face. He told us that he had put ground Valium pills in their tea, with the intention of setting the bear free once they had fallen asleep. "You could have consulted us first," complained Simon. "Yes, and didn't you stop to think about what they're going to do when they wake up?" shouted Shmeiki Baba. "No," said Crispin. "I just want to rescue the bear." "How do you know the bear won't attack us when you free him?" asked Genevieve. "Come on, you can see he's a total cutie," answered Crispin. "Are you experienced with bears?" asked Simon. "No, I'm not," said Crispin, "but I can see he's gentle." "You're probably right about that," said Kamal. "We should leave immediately," said Genevieve. "Who wants to wait with me until the circus performers are asleep and release the bear?" asked Crispin. Kamal, Dylan, Mei Ling, and Shmeiki Baba raised their hands. "Who thinks we should leave right away?" asked Genevieve. Simon, Genevieve, and I raised our hands. The stays have it, said Crispin, but the question is, how do the goes feel about it? Well, I'm used to putting my own life in front of other animals, said Simon, but for some reason, this time, I guess I'm willing to make an exception. And Genevieve said, Okay, you crazy bastard, let's do it. And everyone turned to me. I will also stay, I said. It's okay, said Shmeiki Baba, seeing my reticence. I will protect you. And how will you manage to do that? I asked. With love, he answered. I asked Crispin if he had any Valium left, but he said he put it all in the chai. We waited until the circus performers had fallen fast asleep, and as planned, Crispin went over and released the bear from his chain. He encouraged the bear to run away, but the bear didn't listen and followed him back to our group. Run away, Mr. Bear, urged Shmeiki Baba when Crispin reached us, but the bear sat down next to us. The rest of us also encouraged the bear to run away, but he refused to move. By now, we were eager to get going and were about to do so when Simon said, I think we should leave some money for the circus performers so they won't feel too bad about losing their bear. They deserve to lose him, said Mei Ling. But maybe they don't realize that what they're doing is wrong, said Simon, and he ran over and left some money for them under a stone. When he returned, Genevieve asked him how much he left, and Simon said 3,000 rupees. Kamal offered to split this with him, and so did Dylan. And we began to walk, but we still could not persuade Mr. Bear to leave us. Okay, Mr. Bear, if it is your will, you can join our group, said Shmeiki Baba. Mr. Bear, just please don't eat us, said Genevieve. He's gentle, said Crispin. Yes, I heard you, said Genevieve. Simon looked at the map with his head torch and suggested that to throw the circus performers off our track, we were best heading into Chandigarh. We agreed this was the wisest option, and we began to walk north through the city. Mr. Bear continued to follow us. Luckily, in the dark, few people noticed our large new friend.